As we all know, as brothers in Christ and sisters, there's just something about the Lord that gives you such a confidence and a boldness that He just seems to take care of everything. When I got in here today, I was picked up by Jimmy Walker. I'd never seen Jimmy. He and I would like to thank he and the whole Walker family for inviting me here. It's a real pleasure to come here in Phoenix. I've been here since I left, and the last time I played a basketball game here, I think was about, maybe 1979 or 80. But it's just a real pleasure. We had many conversations on the phone about this particular event, and it was just a real pleasure for me to come out here. In fact, when he picked me up, he ran me all over the place, meeting all kind of people, and I was a little bit confused.
He asked me for you to spin it on your finger.
Oh, he wants me to spin the ball on my finger. Well. Okay, tell Jimmy thanks. I guess this is part of the surprises, Glenn, you know. See, the only difference is Glenn still plays and I don't. It reminds me of a story about how confused I was today, because he had me going to all these places, had me go over to Paul's practice and all these different little things. And I heard this story last week, and it was about a little boy who came down to his mother and said, Mom, is it true that when I was born that I literally came from dust? And she said, yes, that's right, son. You sure did. And he said, well, is it true then that when I die that I'm just going to be dust again? And she said, that's true, son. That's right. He said, well, I got a problem, Mom. And she said, what's that? She said, you got to come up in my bedroom and look under my bed, because I don't know if somebody's coming or going. I just thought I'd share that. I don't play basketball anymore, and I really don't want to give too much time to this, but I played so much as a child, and I'll get into that in a minute, that I should be able to do a couple things. As long as I don't fall in the pool here. I used to be able to spin the ball. I've let my fingernails grow, Glenn. It's the first time in my life since about a year now. But it's kind of tough to do. Thanks a lot, Jimmy. I really appreciate this, wherever you are. It's a real nice guy. Hey, thanks, Jimmy. Surprised you didn't want me to do it on the platform there. But the lights are good in your face, too, when you try to do this. But I used to be able to do all this kind of stuff, but like I said, I don't really do it anymore. I don't really. That's a surprising one. I'll try to do one more. This is really called outside in. This is pretty tough. I can get that in here. Oh well. Right there. I'll do one more thing for you. I used to do this. It's almost like Glenn when he had his real high voice back in 20 years ago, and I've seen a lot of kids get high voices from trying this particular drill that I did 30 years ago. But this is actually called the ricochet drill, and then it goes into the bullet ricochet. It was preceded by coordination and then into what's called speed, quickness of hands. Hopefully my hands will be quick enough and I'll be all right. But actually I'll try to do it here. The object is just to throw the ball there and catch it. Then what you do is you just gradually throw it harder and harder. There, okay. Thank you very much. I was sitting in my home last week. My kids had just gone off to school, and my wife had taken off to run some errands. And I was sitting it was about 8 o'clock in the morning, and I was sitting at my breakfast table, and I was just sort of in the spirit thinking about what I should come out here and speak about, and asking the Lord if He wanted anything special for me to share. I started getting things from Him that really just gave me a real heart feeling for and compassion for all the people that I've come across. that don't know Jesus Christ as their Savior. You know, I was sitting there, and all of a sudden, about a year and a half ago, my wife and I went through a terrible tragedy. I was restoring an old Victorian home, and I'd just gotten back from China. 10 ex-NBA players went over there to play 6 games against Olympic teams. And when I'd gotten back, when we were out for about a month, some friends came over, and we were showing them the house that we were doing. We went upstairs. This old Victorian house has 13-foot ceilings, and so to the top of the floor, it was about 14 feet, which would be, to give you an idea what that is, would be the top of a backboard. And so we had these friends. We had our 2 children with us, and we'd gone upstairs with them, and there was no banister, so we told our kids to, stay away from the stairs. Just going to be here a second. And we were showing them, and as careful as we are with our children, I'd forgotten that didn't even really think about it. I'd built in a little closet in an upstairs room, and in that closet was an air conditioning vent, an old one that had been stuffed up with insulation. And it really happened very quickly. They both kind of ran in there. We didn't see them, and all of a sudden it was like that. My wife heard a very loud thump, and when she went back there, Joshua, my little 2-year-old at the time, wasn't there. I just kind of knew what happened, and I dashed down the floor, and I went in there, and I saw my little son lying there in a pool of blood. He had landed, and impact had hit him directly in the eye, is where he hit, on this part of his head. He was in a semi-conscious state. I've taken CPR in the past, and my wife never did see him. I'm glad she didn't, because it's something I'll live with all my life. But it was a moment in my life, just a few months before, that I'd prayed a prayer to the Lord and said, Lord, you've saved me, and I'll never, ever take anything for granted in my whole life again. I just won't do it. No matter what happens in my life, I'm just going to count it all joy. I really am. I'm going to count it joy, and I'm going to leave it to you, because that's the only person that's going to heaven, is that person that trusts in Christ. Well, anyway, I picked him up, and he was just a lifeless little body. His heartbeat was so faint that I didn't know whether he was going to make it or not. But I rushed him to the hospital, and I got him there, and there wasn't even any doctors there at this particular hospital. The guy that was supposed to be there was off. He was in lunch or something like that, and it just so happened I had a Christian painter there and a Christian carpenter, and they started praying. They found a doctor, and he came in, and they checked him out, and I was in prayer in the other room. My wife was literally away with, just had lost it completely, and we didn't know what was going to happen to Joshua. About 10 minutes later, the doctor came out. He happened to be an eye surgeon, and he says, Pete, Joshua's going to make it. And I said, thank God for that. I said, that's just great. He said, but we've looked in his eye just very quickly, and it looks like all the muscles of his eyes have been torn away. There was such massive swelling on his head on the impact that they felt that there was no way it couldn't have done tremendous damage. So I'm going back in there and check him out, and you just wait in here. I said, fine. I just went back in prayer, and my prayer wasn't that Josh be healed. My prayer was, according to God's plan in Joshua's life, that it just be worked out. And so about 15 minutes later, the doctor came back to me, and he says, Pete, he says, I really can't believe what happened. And I said, what's that, doctor? He says, we looked in Joshua's eye just now, and it's as clear as a bell. There's no contusions. There's no broken bones. His neck there's nothing. I mean, it's just absolutely clear. Plus the fact he's just going to be perfect. There's nothing wrong with him except this massive swelling that has taken place. Well, that was just a little miracle in my life. And as I thought about this, I started reflecting back on my own life. On my own life, when I was like 11 years old, and I was running through the woods one day, and I just happened to be running. We were playing hide and seek, and it was my turn to find the kids, and I was running through the woods, and as I ran down the woods, I didn't see it, but there was a low barbed wire fence, and I ran into it smack, and it caught me right here at the thighs and grappled me and flung me out and brought me back, and I hung upside down by this barbed wire fence. And I remember screaming and yelling for my friends to come, and they didn't come because they were hiding from me, which really didn't help much. Finally, one of them did come and helped me up and got me off, and I really never saw the hand of God there that protected me. There was another time that I was born, and I wasn't born, but I was raised in Clemson, South Carolina. We used to go out to a railroad trestle on the Seneca River. It's about 40 feet high, and there was telephone wires. To join this particular movement that was going on back then in the 50s, you had to go out there and you had to wait till the train got to the beginning of the tracks, and then you either had to jump or get mashed. So two of us went out there, and I happened to be one of them, and you could not leave and you could not jump until after the train came. The train had come so many times before and had stopped before, but knew what was going to happen and decided from time and time again that he wasn't going to stop anymore because he knew kids would jump. So we were standing there, and lo and behold, the train was coming, and I was all excited, and it was just I couldn't wait. Was I going to jump or was I going to get mad? Because you couldn't make it off the trestle. It was about 30 feet high, 30, 40 feet. Well, at that moment that it came and it got to the end of the track, you had about 5 seconds, and he was going about 45 miles an hour, I guess, blowing his horn, blowing it, and I finally jumped. We both jumped at the same time. I really never thought about the hand of God that protected me in that moment in my life. Nor did I think about it one time when I went off into a little place, and we used to go up on the highlands in North Carolina, and we used to come down this embankment where there was a waterfalls, and you would slide down and you'd slide into what was called a washing hole. It was a place where you would go down in here and it would just literally throw you back up like a washing, tumbling machine. Under there was a little cliff, and nobody knew where that cliff led to because, like I said, it was just a hole. I remember one time going in there and sort of catching myself before I was flung back up, holding myself under, and then going along the inside of the wall, thinking to myself, of course, being cool, that, all those kids would probably think I've drowned. Not knowing that if I would have probably went another 2 feet, I'd been sucked up and into somewhere else. But I never really noticed the hand of God that was over me, protecting me. Nor did I notice at the time that I got in a car drunk and was driving with a bunch of my friends. And as I was driving that car and hit a parked car going 50 miles an hour and literally got stuck in the windshield of the glass. And they had to beat the glass, the whole windshield out from me just to get me out of the car. And as I got out and walked around and nobody was hurt, and neither was I never thought about how God overruled and kept Pete Maravich here. And it's been that way in my life, hundreds upon hundreds of times, that I've literally reflected back at the times that I really shouldn't be here. But I am here, and I'm here for one purpose. And I grew up in Clemson, South Carolina, and when I was 4 years old, the only thing I ever knew was basketball. Much like Glenn Campbell sings, and he's one of the greatest singers of all time. There's just no doubt in my mind. I used to listen to him in college. I mean, like, it was unbelievable in college. All the songs he sang tonight, back in those days. And by the time I was 5 years old, I was already playing organized basketball. My parents baited me into the game. They never forced me. And when I was 7 years old, my dad came to me and he says, Pete, he says, I don't have any money to send you to college. You're going to have to get a scholarship. And if you get a scholarship, they'll pay your way. I only make $2,900 a year, and that's just not going to pay your way by the time you get there. And if you're good enough, Pete, you might even make it to the pro basketball. That's where the greatest players play. And there's so few. There's so few, like 1 in 20,000 make it to the NBA that play the game. And if you get there, you might play on a team that wins a world championship. And you'll get a big diamond ring, Pete, so big, and it has on there world champions, and you'll be declared as the rest of the team one of the greatest at that particular time. Not only that, Pete, you'll be able to make money. They'll pay you for doing it. They'll pay you for playing something that you enjoy doing. Well, from that day, I decided to commit my life totally to basketball. I was dedicated, possessed, and obsessed by it. I was so dedicated to it, I'll tell you some of the things I used to do. We lived 2.5 miles outside of town in Clemson, South Carolina, and I used to get the basketball and I'd dribble in all the way. I would not accept a ride. I would dribble in with my right hand and dribble back home with my left hand, 5 miles a day, to the gym where I'd play 8 to 10 hours a day. When I finally got a bicycle when I was about 11 years old, 10, 11 years old, I learned to dribble the basketball on my bicycle all the way in. It made it a lot easier to get into town, too, and I got there quicker. And I dribbled the ball literally by riding the bicycle. It got so bizarre that my dad came to me one day and he says, "Pete, come on, get your basketball and let's go in the car." I said, "Where are we going?" He says, "I'll tell you when we get there." He went over there and he went on this specific highway and there weren't many cars there, and he said, "Now look, I want you to get in the back seat, stick yourself out that back window there, and you start dribbling the ball. I'm going to drive at various speeds. I want to see if you can really control this thing." And so I did that, and he'd go 5, 10, 15 miles an hour and 20 miles an hour. And of course, if you realize when you're trying to dribble a basketball out of a car or on a bicycle, you got to throw it way out in front because he's going and it's coming back. See? It really comes back quick, along with a lot of rocks. And to see the faces on the people that just happened to be driving by was something in itself. It really was. I used to take the basketball to bed with me. I slept with the basketball till I was about 13 years old. I would get in bed, and I'd lay in the bed for 1 hour before I ever went to sleep, and I would repeat 3 things. Fingertip control, backspin, follow through. Fingertip control, backspin, follow through as I released it, laying down. I was completely possessed by the game. I used to go around my house blindfolded, dribbling the ball, because I knew where everything was. Of course, to the dismay of my mother, sometimes I didn't, and I knew how to dribble the ball very fast out of the house. I used to get the basketball, and I would dribble out in thunderstorms. Not little rainy, not sun showers, but thunderstorms, lightning, everything else. You couldn't even see. I used to sneak out my back window. I'd go to this little spot where there was a mud hole. It was kind of a real hard mud, and I'd start dribbling the ball as the mud and everything splashed up on me, and literally scared to death because of the thunder and lightning, because I felt like if I could dribble in that mud and that water and everything else, control it, I could certainly do it on a court when somebody was guarding me. See, I was so committed to the game of basketball. In fact, from the time I was 5 years old till I was 17 years old, I played over 20,000 hours of basketball. In the March Reader's Digest, they had a story in there about television and how it affects young people's minds, or any person. It wasn't for or against television, it just says how it affects one's mind. And it said that the average person, by the time he's 20 years old, sees 20,000 hours of television. And I kind of paralleled that with my life. 20,000 hours of people watching television. I've spent 20,000 hours of hard sweat playing the game of basketball. When I was 12 years old, it was my first time I ever played in a regular game for junior varsity. I made the junior varsity when I was 12, and at 13, I started on my high school team and played 5 years of high school basketball. I was 4'9½", and when I was 12 years old. So some of you youngsters that think that you're not, tall enough, you will be. And so at that time, at 12, a reporter came up to me after the game, and I used to shoot the basketball from down here because I was too weak to shoot it from up here. And so I used to take the ball and take it and release it like this. And this reporter saw me, and he says, "Well, it looks like this guy is drawing a pistol." And he wrote that up, and that name has stuck ever since. I just threw that in. I know that doesn't interest you at all, but I just wanted to say that. But he asked me after the game, he came up and interviewed me. That was my first interview I ever had, and I wish it had been my last. But he said, "What are you going to do when you grow up, Pistol Pete?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to play pro basketball. I'm going to be on a team that wins a world championship, get a diamond ring, and make $1 million." And he literally fell off his chair with laughter. And I said, "What are you laughing about?" He says, $1 million? They don't make that kind of money. This was in the 50s, and he was right. But I just felt like at some point in my life I would. My early church life was absolutely probably zero. I was not raised in a Christian home. I was raised in a church home. I was raised with telling Pete, you got to go to church. It's good to go to church. You need church. You need church, church, church. And my parents didn't really go to church that much. They went when I was a small baby. When we moved down to Clemson, they really didn't have the time to go to church anymore, but they made sure I did go. So I went to a couple different churches. Wherever my friends went, I went. But when I got into church, I didn't ever hear anything. I never heard who Jesus Christ was when I was young because I didn't want to hear. See, I would sit in there and literally count ticks in my head, 1, 2, 3, up to a minute, and that would go for an hour until I got out of there. I felt that if I was in this church for an hour, somebody in Philadelphia, L.A., Boston, or New York was playing basketball, and when it came down to get that scholarship, I would not get it. See? And I progressed on into my teenage years. When I was 14 years old, it was the first time I ever had my first taste of alcohol. I had a beer at 14 years of age on the steps of the Methodist Church in Clemson, South Carolina. And I liked it. I really did like it. I liked it a lot. If there's something I can tell you young people here tonight, it's this. Don't ever take that first drink, and don't ever take that first drug, because it'll never be your last, and it'll lead to destruction. Because that's literally what almost happened in my own life. 98% of all people in jails today started with that first drink. 85% of over 500,000 people in correctional institutions today committed their crimes while under the influence of a mind-altering substance, drugs or alcohol. And many of them don't even remember committing the crime. But that's what it'll do to you. And all of a sudden, this tremendous commitment that I had and everything else kind of went down the drain. I didn't have it anymore, and I'd played so much up until that time when I was 14, 15, going on to 16, 17, but all of a sudden I had time on the weekends to do other things. I saw the opposite sex for the first time in my life. You see, I was completely obsessed with basketball. I didn't do whatever other people did. My God was basketball. Their God was sex, alcohol, and whatever else. But I didn't see any of that until I was 14, and then my eyes opened up. And I enjoyed it, and I started getting into it. It was like a little toehold in my life, you see, because that's the way the enemy works. He just gets a toehold in your life. That's all he wants. He wants a toehold because we all try to justify things we do. And then that toehold led into Pete Maravich became a foothold, and the foothold became a stronghold, and that stronghold became an entire possession. I'm not scared to tell you here I was an alcoholic. I can't get people to write that up because I've never been to a clinic or anything. And all my friends drank just like I did, and they were alcoholics too. And the thing about it was that as I kept following my own desires, because see, I chose the road I wanted to go down. I can't blame God for anything. See, we have a choice here, and I had my choice. And I picked that broad road. It talks about two roads in the Bible, the broad one and the narrow one. I chose the broad one. I was fulfilling my own fleshly desires, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a great deal because there's a great pleasure in sin. There's a lot of pleasure in it. Because if there wasn't, nobody would do it. But I found out now that the pleasure of sin is not, at the beginning, is not worth it at the end. At least the sting, that is. When I was 18 years old, I was asked to go out to Lake Arrowhead out in San Bernardino, California, to a campus crusade for Christ. They asked me to come out there and do what you just saw here, what was called Showtime. They said, would you come out here and do your clinic, Pete? I said, well, sure, that'd be great. I'll bring one of my friends and we'll just come out there. California, I've never been there, that'd be fun. So we got in the car, and I was just reaching my 18th birthday. Literally right before what was to be called the Pistol Pete era in Southeastern Conference basketball. And so I drove out there, and we partied all the way out, and we had fun, and we chased girls, and we just were in every bar we could find and everything else. It took us 3 or 4 days to get out there. And as I drove up on this campus, I noticed that there were people sitting around praying and holding hands under trees and things of this nature, and I became very embarrassed. I didn't want any part of that. And I told my friend, I said, hey, we got to hurry and get out of here. I'm going to do this clinic and get out of here. These people are nuts. I mean, what are they smoking? And put that beer down. We don't want to see him with this beer. So I checked into this place, and it was for 3 days. And I asked them, when am I supposed to do my clinic? And they said, well, Pete, we're not sure yet, but if you just bear with us. We're going to have you over here with this group. And I said, what do you mean? What am I going to do? He says, well, nothing. Just nothing to do. We'll just put you here. Would it be all right? And I said, okay. So I stayed with this group. My friend went with another group. And for 3 days, I finally heard who Jesus Christ was. If I would have died before that, I could have never claimed ignorance. But the thing about it was I heard how he had died for me. I heard, number one, that I wasn't a very good person. See, I thought I was always good. I mean, I'm a pretty good guy. I never really hurt anybody. I mostly hurt myself. I'm sure I'd go out and get drunk. And alcohol was such a stronghold in my life. Everybody's got something that strongholds them, don't they? That's what I thought, because everybody I went out with did. It was just something else, or it was the same thing I did. And I heard that I wasn't very good. And the guy kept reading out of the Bible. He read me Romans 3:10-23, where it says, I'm no good and there's no one righteous, not one. In fact, I'm just a worm, a piece of decaying wood. I didn't like that. I didn't like it at all. Because, see, I didn't understand. And then he told me how Jesus Christ went to the cross for me. And see, it didn't have an impact on Pete Maravich. I wasn't concerned about that. To me, it was just a story. It was a story. It was nice. That's nice. See? But he told me that Christ paid the sin for me, the penalty. Romans 6:23. He paid it. And that if I was ever going to be saved, it was only by the grace of God, because no matter where you go to church or how many times you go to church, or there's some people born in a Christian home think they're Christians. It's like saying if you're born in a garage, you're a car. It just doesn't work that way, and we have a lot of churchianity today and not Christianity. But he kept going through it, and he said, and this is this. This is like this. Ephesians 2:8-9. He went through that. We're saved by grace, through faith, and it's a gift of God, not of ourselves. I started thinking about it and everything, but it really didn't have an impact. Not at all. And then he got to John 3:16. I don't know how many of you even know any of these verses. I could repeat them all to you, but I don't want to do that. John 3:16 is probably the most talked about verse in the Bible. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son. Some people putting forgotten Son in there instead of begotten, because that's what he is today. But he read that to me, and then he went to, I kind of heard this, and he says, and Pete, let me tell you something. There's no other way to get to heaven. I said, how do you know? I hear there's a lot of ways. He said, well, if you read your Bible, you'll see in John 14:6, Jesus says he's the only way. He didn't say it was part of the way or some of the way. He says he's the only way. He says he's the only truth. Not part of the truth, some of the truth. He's the only truth. And that means that if Jesus Christ is the truth, then everything that I read in that Bible about Jesus Christ and what he said is the truth, or it's a complete lie. There's no middle ground, friends. There's no middle ground. You see, I believe that book that's on that table there is 100% the inerrancy of God. In fact, I know it. See, I know it now. But after the end of 3 days there was no impact on my life. We went out to the beach. Bill Battle, who was an All-American football player, and with a bicep as large as my thigh, said, we're going out to the beach. I'm taking this group with me. We're going to witness for Christ. And I said, what do you mean witness? What is this, Bill? What do you mean witness? What are you talking about? See, because I didn't understand. He said, you just come along, Pete. We just want to show you what we do here. So I went along with him, and we went out on the beaches out there, California beaches, and he goes up to the worst-looking group. This was back during the 60s. This is the most revolutionary time, the rebellious time in our history, probably, that's led so much of the rebellion today. And yet, he went up to the worst-looking group. Guy had tattoos all over his arm, hair down here. He was smoking a joint, drinking. There was about 4 or 5 of them. They were mean-looking, ugly. They didn't smell very good. Everything, and I was in the background. But you know, the Lord has a way to use people. You see, he went up to this guy who was the meanest-looking guy, right down there. He says, you know something? I would really like to share something with you folks. And this guy was literally going to turn around and punch him, I know. Because he turned around and he said, look, go right ahead. Because that bicep was right in his face. And if anything impressed me, it was that. That did impress me. I said, wow, how God gets people's attention. It's amazing. So they witnessed, and I don't remember, I think some of them left right away. They said, oh, you Jesus freaks and all this kind of stuff. And I just kind of turned my head. I didn't want no part of it. At the end of 3 days, there was 1,000 kids. And I was part of it, and Bill Bright, who's founder of the Campus Crusade, gave a message, much like Billy Graham, had an invitation for people to come receive Christ. Then he had them to come publicly and receive him. Lo and behold, my friend was sitting next to me. He got up. I said, what are you doing? He says, Pete, I don't know what to tell you. I really don't know what to tell you. I've just received Christ into my life. I said, Kenny, wait a minute, Kenny, it's just something you ate or something, son. And I grabbed him by the arm. I literally tried to steal away his salvation. I said, you don't go up there. You're embarrassing me. I remember saying that. And he pulled away and he went up there. He says, you don't understand. I said, no, I don't. And he walked up there. And I remember sitting there and saying, well, you're not going to get me, God. You're not going to get me. I'm not going out in that highway, dressed in those sandals and that white robe. I've seen those people out there hitchhiking with a little bag. And I'm not going to be there. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to play pro basketball, be in a world championship team, and make $1 million. Boy, I wouldn't life. But you know, as I've reflected over that time, how many times I've cried and wished that I'd received Christ in my life then. You know why? Because God had sent me there for a purpose. Not to do a clinic. I never did one. Nobody even asked me. But He put me there for one reason. Pete, come home now. Come home now, because you're about to embark on a tremendous amount of personal tragedy and destruction in your life. And it doesn't have to be that way, but you're going to choose that way, and you don't have to. But I rejected God. I rejected Jesus Christ. And I went on into college. And I did a lot of things in college. I've set something like around 50 basketball records from high school, college, and pro. And the amount of trophies and awards and plaques that I have, the amount of honorary mayorships and keys to cities that I have, except the time when I go to those cities and try to get the keys, they don't ever give them to me. It could literally, really, could go around this entire pool area. Now, I have a trophy from 1972 in a box that's never been opened. It's 6'5" and 6'5" 1/4 inch tall, the exact height of me. I've never seen it. I've never opened the box. But they're all stored away. They don't really do anything for me. But I've had all those trophies, awards, I've had popularity, I've had fame. I had a tremendous amount of fame back in the 60s, tremendous amount of popularity. Everywhere we went, we played before right at 1 million people in college in 3 years, and that's pretty good. And I had all this adulation, and people wrote me. I got thousands of letters a week from fans. We idolize you, Pete Maravich. You're my idol. You're this, you're that. And I wasn't a role model at all. Not at all. I wasn't a role model for young people at all. None. Zero. And then, after my college, and I was All-American, and I was I'm the leading scorer of all time in college basketball. It'll be broken someday. But I'm the leading scorer. I averaged over 44 points a game for a 3-year period. I just hold just all kind of records. My high school records are still held. I still hold the record for the All-Star game. I scored 47 points in the East-West High School All-Star game back in 1965. But it's still there. It hasn't been broken, and some great players have come through there. And then I went into the pros, you see. And I'd had a lot of fun in college, a lot of fun. Too much fun. In fact, I was in 9 accidents in college and walked away from every one of them. Not only that, one time I was coming home from putting on a clinic in Pennsylvania, and I drove 700 miles, and I stopped for the night. It was a halfway point, and I went down to a local pub, local little bar, sat in there and had about 2 beers. And a young lady came over to me. I said, "How are you, sweetie?" I said, "I'm just fine." She said, "You mind if I sit down here?" I said, suit you. So I was sitting there. I wasn't there 2 minutes when a guy came up to me, about 6'5", about 270 pounds. I said, "What are you doing with my girl?" I said, "I'm not doing anything, sir. I'm just sitting here. I'm just having this cold beer here. I don't want any trouble." And he started pushing me. He started hitting me in the shoulder. And I grew up as a kid knowing that you never back down from anybody. I don't care what the odds. I wasn't going to back down. And I told him to get his hands off of me and all this, and before long, one thing led to another, and they said, "Y'all get out of here if you're going to fight." He said, "Yeah, come on." So I said, "Fine." So I got up, and I went out quickly, and I made myself through the crowd, and I got outside, and I stayed behind the door. And I was really going to get this guy when he came out, but he never came. Of course, I didn't wait there about 2 minutes, and he didn't come. You see? And so I said, "I better get out of here," and I left, and I walked out in the parking lot. As I was walking in the back of the parking lot out toward I saw a telephone booth where I was going to call a taxi to go to the Holiday Inn where I was staying. As I was walking out, I heard this guy came out and he yelled to me. And little did I know that another guy had gone around the other side. And they both had blackjacks, which I didn't know. And the whole story is that the guy just literally, they just hit me from behind and beat me up pretty good. As I laid there on that parking lot that night, that girl came up, and I was all blood. And she took a .25 automatic pistol, and she put it in my mouth and cocked it. And she says, "You're a dead man, Pistol Pete. How about that?" And I remember laying there, and from the depths of my heart, I said, "Yeah, kill me, because then I'll have peace." But you know something? There's a God up there that overruled Satan that night too. He overruled him, and I know that. And that's why I fall on my face morning, noon, and night. Thank God for saving me. And I went into the pros and I signed the largest contract in the history of sports. Not basketball, sports. At the time, it made the Guinness Book of Records. It lasted 30 days. They started pouring out a lot of big money back then. And I searched all through the 1970s for what meaning there was to life. I had to know the meaning. What was the meaning? And I got involved in all kinds of different things. I was involved in yoga and TM. I was involved very heavily in ufology, philosophy. I was involved in different religions, Hinduism especially. I was involved in everything. But the thing about it is, none of it really satisfied me. They were just all brief interludes of satisfaction. Much like my life was brief interludes of just ego gratification, satisfaction. I never paralleled that my life was literally just sinful. I was rebellious against God in heaven. I rebelled against Him. I said, I don't need you. I don't want you. So it wasn't His fault what was going on in my life. But His arms were always outstretched for Peter Maravich. Always. And all through that time, in fact, in 1976, I decided I was going to live to be 150 years old. And I got very heavily into nutrition because I was into Hinduism and I was into the karma and all these other types of situations. And I became a vegetarian and then a fruitarian and a macrobiotic and a mini-dose and a maxi-dose on vitamins. And I fasted 25 days and I sat in all kind of different positions. And I was searching for life, friends. I was really searching for life because my life had no meaning at all. My life had absolutely no meaning at all. And at each one of these stops, I had to have something else. It just didn't satisfy me. In 1980, I quit basketball. I just quit. I walked away from it because of immaturity and because of the fact that I just got tired of it all. I just got tired of it. I got tired of my life. And I became a recluse for about 2 years. I sat in my home. We had our first son, Jason. He was only 1.5 years old. And I was sat there for hours at a time trying to teach him 7- and 8-year-old puzzles because I wanted my son, Jason, to have what I didn't. I wanted him to have a high intellect. See, I wanted him to be an intelligent person. I wanted him to be able to go to the right parties and say the right things. I thought that was important. I really thought that was important. And so my wife used to come to me and she says, Pete, you really need to go see someone because you're really flipping out. I said, what do you mean? She says, you haven't left this house in 2 weeks. I said, yeah, I have. I go out to the garage and stuff. But I was really lost. And in 1982, I went to bed one night. It was like any other night. Pete Maravich had all the material things you could want. He had all the wealth you could want. One person could want. That's all I needed. I used to carry around $5,000 in my pocket in cash, in 20s. I never carried any change. But I had all that stuff, and none of it ever satisfied me. Not the money, not the wealth, not the success. There's so many people out there with this success syndrome. I've got to reach success. All the young people today, they want success. You know where that success is leading these young people? I'll tell you where it's leading them. In their grave. Last year, over 5,000 teenagers committed suicide. Between 14 and 18 teenagers committed suicide today in this country. It happens every day like that. There's an organization in England called Exit. You know what they do? They teach people how to commit suicide. And they're backed up. Everybody's reaching out for life. Everybody's reaching out. What's the answer? But nobody wants to reveal. Nobody wants it revealed to them. They don't want to know the truth. I didn't want to know the truth. And in 1982, I went to bed. And I laid there in bed and I couldn't sleep. I didn't understand. And all of a sudden, everything started coming up in my life. All the sin. Every sin I'd ever committed, and I've committed many, let me tell you, many sins in my life. And there's nothing hidden. And I'm not airing all my dirty laundry here. I'm not trying to. I don't want to give Satan any credit. But I can tell you this, it all came up. And it also came up when I was 18, when I could have received Christ. And it was 5:30 in the morning now. And I laid there crying with 2 pillows back up to my back with an unsaved wife next to me. And I was sitting there crying. And I said, God, I've punched you, I've kicked you, I've cursed you, I've used your name in vain, I've mocked you, I've embarrassed you, I've plucked your beard, I've done all those things. And yet, will you really forgive me? The things that I've done? And I was about to get over on the side of my bed, and what happened to me doesn't happen to everybody. And what happened to me happened to me, and that's why I'm talking out of my shoes. Many people don't believe it. Many theologians don't believe it. Many theologians don't believe in God. But it happened to me. But the time I was about to go over on the side of that bed to receive Christ in my life, however crude it would have been, because there's no sinner's prayer in the Bible. You do it from your heart. God spoke to me audibly right there in the room. And He said, be strong and lift thine own heart. Literally audibly, not in my spirit. It filled the room. I looked around the room. I was in total shock. I'd never heard anything like that before. And I was so shocked that I reached over and I woke my wife, just shaking her like crazy. I said, Jackie, did you hear what the Lord said to me? Did you hear that? You must understand, Jackie had seen me go through all kind of trips in my life. And she just kind of looked at me in a dark haze that it was at 5:30 in the morning and said, Pete, you really have gone nuts, haven't you? And she just went back to sleep. Through all the tears, through all the times, I went over on my bed and I said, Jesus, I know you're real because I've tried everything else. I've got nowhere else to go. I'm history. If you don't save me, I won't last 2 more days. And He saved me. And it's not a story, folks. But He saved me that day, and my life has never been the same since. Never. It has never been the same since. It's not something that just happens to and you forget about it. The inward manifestation of Jesus Christ comes into your life. You'll never hold Him back. You'll never hold Him back. Matthew 5:16, let your light shine before men in such a way that your good works may be seen and glorify your Father in heaven. Because all Christians, every Christian that comes to know Christ is supposed to let his light shine. And I can tell you this, folks, I would never want to be on that tightrope because of my pride, because of embarrassment, because of peer pressure, because of my mother or my dad or my friend, or what will they think, or what will they think? You think Glenn Campbell cares what anybody thinks right now? I guarantee he doesn't. And for eternity, he'll be praising God just like I will be. And eternity is a long time. I heard eternity explained one time. Think of the earth as a solid steel ball. Solid steel ball suspended by a chain infinitely into the heavens. And think of a little tiny hummingbird that comes to the steel ball earth once every 10,000 years and flaps its wings once against the solid steel ball earth and then flies away for 10,000 more years. When the inertia of those wing flaps makes the solid steel ball earth dust, and the same way with the chain that suspends it, you still got eternity. It's something that all of you are going to have to grip one day in your life. I'm not up here to speak generalities. Jesus Christ changed my life. Money didn't do it. Women didn't do it. Friends didn't do it. Pastors didn't do it. Wealth didn't do it. Success, president of being a company, owning your own business, having your own boat. Whatever you can think of, whatever's holding you back from Christ, they won't do it. Do you realize that if you live to be 80 years old, you have only lived over a little over 700,000 hours? And half of that, 350,000 hours, is spent sleeping and watching television, the average person? I don't have much time left. And the time that I have, I'm giving to the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm giving it to Him because that's what I'm called to do. I'm not called to come up here. I'm not called to be nice and speak in generalities, and you might offend some people. That's fine. I heard a pastor say one time, Adrian Rogers, if you don't make them mad, sad, or glad, you haven't done your job. I feel compassion for people that I've never felt before. Everybody I meet, I feel for. Because you see, there is a heaven and there is a hell. And I could stand up here and I could even talk to you about evolution for the next 2 hours if you wanted to. But I don't need to do that. You can just go and read Sir Frederick Hoyle from Cambridge, the foremost evolutionist and mathematician and astronomer of our time, who just recently said not too long ago, I have been duped for 20 years. Through my mathematical experiments, there is no possible way that we came from primordial soup. In fact, I know we have been created. You can call it God. I don't. But we have been created from something. And he says, anybody that teaches that, it's utter nonsense of the highest order, quote, unquote. And yet our kids in school every day are taught that exact thing. And by the time they get out of school, they are taught 12,000 hours of evolution and secular humanism. But you know, hell is a real place, folks. Did you know, as we've been here already, there have literally been thousands of people died? Between 84 and 94 people die every minute in the world. 2 million people died last year in the United States. 30 million people died last year in the world. 30 million people died last year. Of that, by conservative estimates of theologians and Christians, over 90% are in the abode between death and judgment. They're there. It's real. You're spiritual. You're going to live forever. You got nothing to do with it. So am I. I praise God I know where I'm going. And I hope you do too. I hope you really, tonight, will look at yourself. Examine yourself. Are you really happy? Because, see, hell's not a good place to go. And Jesus talked about hell more than he talked about heaven. And God doesn't want anybody to go there. And here we are with our finite little minds of 3% use of our brain, saying there is no God. Here we have an expanse of a universe here that nobody knows where it goes. And the atheist says there is no God out there somewhere. How can any man say that? And how can any fool believe it? You know what they do in hell? I don't have much more. Some of you like to get this over with, but there's going to be a lot of weeping in hell, and there's going to be a lot of wailing. There's gnashing of teeth, probably because of anger, or probably because of the fact they know they've been separated from God forever. Isolation in their spiritual blackness. There's no light in hell. Absolutely no light. There's been testimony of the fact of people that have died and come back. There's been testimony of the fact, even non-religious scientists, Dr. Kubler-Ross, who spent her last 25 years in death and dying. She was before 1,000 scientists and doctors in Los Angeles not too long ago, and she got a standing ovation when she declared, there is life after death, I know it. And she's not even religious. Not only is there spiritual blackness, but there's two things here that won't be there. Two things that we grasp onto here. You see, one of them's light. You see these lights? Light gives you mental stability. Nobody likes to be in the dark for a long period of time. And something to grab onto. Solid things, material things. Well, hell's a bottomless pit. You don't grab anything there. And you know, you can spend 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 centuries in hell and never accomplish one thing there and know that you don't have one less second to spend there. And I'm telling you folks, I cry at night for people that I don't even know. I cry for my brother who's unsaved, that I pray for constantly. And you'll never prove God. You'll never prove him, although all the evidence is there. In fact, I probably could prove him to you just from the research I've done. But you don't need the proof of me. You've got the atheist, the evolutionist, the biochemist in California, the nuclear scientist. They've all done their own evidence, and they've all fallen flat on their face. Of course, you don't read any of that. I really hope, I pray, that you that have never had a relationship with Christ, and it's not important that you know who Christ is. It's important that he knows you. Because Matthew 7:23 says, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Everybody knows who Christ is, especially in America. You can walk that tightrope. You can be just like me. For every person like me that God allowed to go through as a testimonial, there's literally tens of thousands in the pit of hell. One day, mark my words from my heart, you'll be standing there in front of the judge of the universe. And it doesn't matter. Don't say, well, I've got time. I can do it tomorrow. I can do it next week. Because you don't have any time. He gives you today. And your life ends when it ends. There's no coming back. Examine yourself. Think about it. Give Christ a chance. I guarantee you, you will literally be a totally different person. When you receive Jesus Christ in your life, He will do something to you just like He's done to me, to Glenn Campbell, to Paul Westphal, and to so many others. He will do it for you. No matter what you think, no matter what your ego is, no matter how much money you got, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and yet lose his soul? What does it profit you to own everything? Two things I want to say. I'm finished. I said that about 10 minutes ago, didn't I? If I came to you right now, John, and I was a government agent, and you answered your door and you said, I work for the government. Yes, sir. What do you want? I paid my taxes. Well, I know that. We just want to give you this. What is it? Well, open it up. And you open it up, and there in that case was $1 million in cash. He said, wait a minute, what do you mean? You want to give this? That's right, we're giving everybody $1 million. We just want to give it to you. We like you. It's free. You can have it. Take it. I'm sure there's not one person in here that wouldn't take it. We can all use $1 million, couldn't we? Yes, we could. And yet, for 2,000 years, God has been trying to give you eternal life free. And you said, no, I don't want it. But it's free. I don't want it. You don't have to do anything for it. You can't accomplish. It's free. Here, take it. Just trust in me. That's all. I don't want it. If Paul Westphal right now was to peel off that chair and he started gagging and choking and start turning blue before all these people, everybody would be dismayed. Everybody would be running out trying to get doctors. But there might not be enough time because the only thing that's going to save him is oxygen. What if I went right under the stage and had oxygen? And I went over to Paul Westphal, and Paul was there blue in the face, gagging, just about to die. And I said, here, Paul, take this. Oxygen is free. It'll save your life. Take it. I'm sure Paul would look up at me and say, oh, no, Pete, I don't want that. But it's free, Paul. Take it. No, I don't want it. For 2,000 years, God's tried to give you and you and you eternal life. Free. And you've rejected it, just like I did. People, believe me, from the deepest ends of my heart, this is no joke, it's no story. I didn't fly 5.5 hours to come out here just to see y'all and say, hi, how you doing? Here's how I spin a basketball.